All right, good evening. So it is Sunday night, and it is time for another episode of Conservatism on Tap. This is,
Whoop.
this is like our home base, John. This is where we get to go and just talk about things from a purely conservative standpoint. It's always fun talking to people who are not conservative, but I always feel like recharged whenever I get to talk to you and we get to like go through these subjects because we just agree on so much, and it makes me feel like I'm not the only conservative out there, or the only Berkey conservative, as it were. So
I'll try not to ruffle too many feathers then between us, trying to say all on the good stuff. But no, you recharge me as well for a whole another week of good discussion, and it's extremely fun to be here.
awesome. So what beer you got tonight?
I have Smart Mouth right here.
Where's
Again, Virginia local company, so Smart Mouth, and it's a saison beer. I finished all my Founders brews before. I was going to save them. I was like, these need to be for Conservatism on Tap.
Yeah.
And I ended up finishing them all off. But it's not a bad beer at all. It's a saison, but it's just very peppery. So it's not to everyone's taste I've found, but it is definitely one that keeps me pretty pepped up, and I enjoy it quite a bit.
That's awesome, man. So I just got downloaded this app called Taver, and they're not like a sponsor or anything, but I was able to order
Oh yeah.
beers off of that. You get like these craft brews and stuff like that. So it's a TAVOUR, and I've got my first shipment coming in this week, and just like craft beers from like Alaska all the way, to the East Coast and stuff. And so I picked out a bunch. There's like a peach cobbler beer that's coming in, and like a couple stouts, which are my favorites. So I can't wait for that because right now all I have is Yingling. That's what I'm saying. So
well, before you get that whole shipment in, you're gonna one up me on all my beers. So I'm gonna show you this. This is a chocolate covered cherry that has been marinated with moonshine.
That's what I'm talking.
So just want you to know that this is gonna be the good stuff. So whenever we make the best point, the best comment that you're pulling out from here, I'll end up eating one of these cherries. So that's
like
those are for.
Very classy and country at the same time. You got the chocolate cherry, which is like, you'd see at a party. But today we're dancing in moonshine, baby.
It's like, oh wow, that's so good.
All right, so I have one of our followers who sent me some questions, and I think that's just what we're going to do tonight. Is if you're watching this live. Throw down a comment, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, and we'll be happy to get to it. I just want to talk about what you want to talk about, because there's so much going on in the world between the election coming up, stuff that Trump has been doing, to fight COVID-19, and the executive orders that he's made. You can talk about what the Democrats are doing or not doing. Talk about. I know I've got a tweet that AOC put out that we're just going to have to tear up. But there's so much going on in the world. But I want to get as often as we can to the things that our followers care about. And so let me show you. This was some questions that Antonia sent to us. So she's someone who has been following our page for a couple of years now. And she said, "Here you go." So she sent me this message: some deep, random, thought-provoking questions. Do you think there is any value in Marxism from a fundamental standpoint? So. She's not a Marxist. She is a conservative, but she's kind of asking us to think about it. Is there any saving grace to this theory at all, or is it just complete garbage from beginning to end? And then her second question is, can one be a Trump voter but not a Trump supporter? I think that's very interesting, especially with the election coming up and what the part. And then the third one, this is my favorite one, is truth relative. Is truth relative? Big T truth. Is it relative? And that one we're going to have to put on our philosopher hat on. But I like this because you've got the election type question with the Trump voter versus supporter. You get the philosophical question of is truth relative, which is kind of a big open-ended thing. And then the first one, which is kind of in the middle, political theory question that affects us all because there's so many people right now talking about socialism. So you tell me, John, which question do you want to get to first? Because we're going to get to all three tonight.
Let's go with can you vote for Trump but still not be a Trump supporter?
Yeah, so
I say let's tackle that one.
I think that's interesting because can one be a Trump voter but not a Trump supporter? And I think when you wrestle with that question, you have to do so with the election coming up, right? Because that's what matters.
Yeah, of course.
When you think about the choice that we all need to make here pretty soon, is can you be someone who says, you know what, I really don't support Trump, but I'm going to vote for him anyway, even though I may not call myself a full-up Trump supporter. You tell me, John. Do you see yourself falling into that category? Do you even think it is a category? Why?
I definitely, I mean, I definitely think it's a category. I mean, I think that of course you can vote, and I think that it's not just purely for Trump. I don't think Trump isn't the first person where voters have had to ask that question. I think they've had to ask that question, every election. But with Trump, it's a little bit more blatant, just because of how politically incorrect he can be, about how abrasive he can be. Like we said, Wes, he's brought up such a culture war and a class war among Americans that this is all of a sudden becoming more of a national question. And what I find, especially in some of my own social circles, are people really trying to distance themselves between Trump as a person, but with the good that he does. I think where I have issue is that you talk about, especially when it comes to the first election of Trump, people banked on the good that he would do. Right. This is what, Trump says that he would do. I see good in that. And that's where I want to cast my vote. Maybe not for the whole kit and caboodle, as it were, but for at least some of these policies. And the question is, are you sure he's going to do that? Are you sure he's going to put someone in on the Supreme Court that, is going to make the decisions that we want? It's interesting now that we've got Mike Pence denouncing Roberts, for how liberal he's being on his decisions rather than conservative. So, can we really bank on Trump, making good on the things that he says that he's going to make good on? But I think that people really do try to reconcile the question because they want to see their vote mean something. And they look at the alternative. They look at the alternative and they find that that's just not something that they can stand. And so they end up, casting their vote for Trump. I think that, once he won the primary, you saw so many evangelical Christians pretty much having to justify on social media, he is the right candidate. He is the person that we need to go for. So I think there's a little bit of decision making of we need to convince ourselves that this is better than the alternative. But that doesn't mean that we have to enjoy the man as he is. That's what I've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, you could be someone who votes for Trump, but it's not so much that you support him as that you are against what the Democrats stand for, right? As if you are someone who is very suspicious, maybe of Joe Biden in particular. He seems kind of creepy to me, but it doesn't seem like a hard left type liberal. But let's not kid ourselves. If Joe Biden was elected, he's going to bring in a whole lot of leftist policies. He's going to bring in all kinds of people, into his administration that are far to the left. He's going to have Bernie Sanders supporters. He's going to have, he worked with him on some of his platform. He's going to bring in, people like AOC and, give her a bigger platform and things like that. Nancy Pelosi will be around forever, So he's going to have all these administrations posts to fill, and he's going to do that with people that are probably at least as far to the left as he is, if not more so. And in doing that, maybe you say, hey, I don't want those things to happen. Therefore, I'm going to cast my vote against Joe Biden and for, Donald Trump for that reason. And then you can have someone who is obviously a Trump supporter and a voter at the same time. But where's the spectrum on that, I think, is the question as well. Is you have some people who everything that Trump does is absolutely gold and great and he's the greatest president ever. And then you have some people who have more of a nuanced view of, I like his foreign policy or I like what he's done with the economy, but I don't really like what he's done with COVID. But I'm going to vote for him anyway for the reasons, that I laid out. So there's an entire reasoning behind why someone votes. And it could be, you could vote purely on the basis of the Supreme Court. I've seen people, do that.
Yes,
they cast
definitely
because they are single issue voters and they want to see Roe v. Wade overturned and they want, to see pro-life judges. And honestly, the only way you're going to get that is very clear. At least, in our current paradigm, the only way you're going to get that is through a Republican president. You're certainly not going to get that with the Democrats. They've said that. And so if you are a single issue voter, well, then there you go. So anyway, I'm not telling anybody how to vote or even, really telling you how I would vote, but I am saying it's certainly possible to be a Trump voter, but not necessarily a big supporter of his. And,
and the problem with how he has run himself and like on his tweets and things is that like Trump himself has allowed for no middle ground when it comes to his support. You either love him or like he completely disowns you. That's pretty much how he treats his advisors and his personnel. Like if they criticize him, they're immediately out, which is what he's had to do with the media. But he takes that even to his closest advisors, and that's like where the voters feel is like, well, I don't exactly like him here, but there have been people who've been fired for less,
Yeah.
that are close to him. So where does that leave me as the voter? I got to love him. I feel obligated that I have to do that in order to vote for him. And then Trump supporters take that in pressure, So if say I vote for Trump, but then I criticize him for this, that, or the other, Trump supporters immediately assume that I'm a never Trumper or something, and that's not exactly right either. So like he hasn't left any real, conversation to the middle ground.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe that's something that we hope that that their campaign will change here next few weeks. I know that they're going through kind of a retooling. Trump changed the person who's running his campaign, and that's really what I would like to see. That would speak to me is if like you've got ads, and I know that there's several going on right now, but if you have ads that make it about more than just Joe Biden, right? Make it about the entire administration that the Democrats would bring in, and what would that mean? And then the other thing, like this does appeal to me, is when you look at who are the two justices on the Supreme Court, and especially with Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, I've read several of his decisions, and I just really love what the guy is saying. Gorsuch, we've talked about him, and he's played some games and things like that. But he's certainly more conservative than what we would have gotten if Hillary Clinton had been elected, right? And if they could make the election about that, then I think that you're going to get more voters than someone who you have to agree with Trump all the time. I mean, Trump's contradicted himself before. I mean, all of us do it to some extent.
Right, of course.
And so it shouldn't be so much of a test of that as it is, a diverse array of reasons for making your vote and allowing people to have that, and that being okay. So anyway, we'll look at some comments of what people think as well in response to that. But I want to get to that first question as well, because we got a lot of people talking about this. Because when you look at the Trump side of things, we could talk about that all night. But on the left side of things, is you increasingly see people who are avowed socialists, who are standing up for an ideology that has been associated with regimes like Soviet Russia, North Korea, China, Venezuela. You have people who have elected office in the United States saying, this is what I believe as well. Do you think, John, that there is any value to not just socialism, but an explicit Marxism from a fundamental standpoint? So I want to get your initial thoughts, and then let's look at what some people say, because we had some really great responses to this.
Yeah, I kept this one second, just because it's hard to develop a full response on all the positives. Because first off, I'll just touch on some of the negatives, because when I read Marx, I read a lot of information about upheaval, about change, about positively advocating violent upheaval.
Yep.
So I can't really say that I advocate for any of those kind of things, or see a way where Burke, loves that kind of upheaval. He still maintains the traditions. He still maintains the institutions, and the institutional love. So on those fronts, where is the middle ground? What I do read in Marx is a couple of things. First off, he doesn't, even in the Communist Manifesto, he doesn't lay out any particular blueprint about how Marxism should look like. Just because if someone is a socialist doesn't mean they want Soviet Russia to make a comeback, right? They don't want a regime to take over and all over again or anything like that. So like there is some gray area where you can make some positive change. I think Marx does believe, just like Burke, that there is this, I guess the phrase I think is a wheel of time, right? That leads towards a good progression, that things will get better, right? It is only a matter of time because, for Burke, it's that these institutions are strong and we keep what works and we gently correct the things that don't, right? And so we're constantly building upon ourselves to create this new plateau, this evolution of society for ourselves. For Marx, it's in the people's labor, it's in the people's work that their labor is going to continue to grow over and over time, where that becomes this force of movement that is to be reckoned with. So they both believe in this sense of progression of society, that there is a meaningful progression towards society where it needs to go. So it's not it's not all negative. But I think with Marxism there is just this. It's just this tear down the establishment in order to make it into our image of our labor and of those who work hard. I think Marxism also really likes to point out the injustices that they find, the inequalities that they find, where conservatives sometimes just want to put a blind eye towards. So they're quick to really just dig in to all the injustice that they see, which isn't a bad thing either. But the problem that I have with Marxism is that it's almost this call for an immediate upheaval and change,
violence,
and rooted in violence. So it's not a full answer they want. I know the difference is better than I would say something that's similar. But progression, yes, I can get behind. Things will get better, but I don't think it's by overturning all that we've established.
All right, not for the reasons that he describes. So. Yeah, I have a whole lot of thoughts on that. We did just get a comment from it's like Julio Rojas, who said, "Keep up the good work." So thank you, Julio. Appreciate you being on the show. If anybody else has comments,
that's a good comment.
There you go. You get to eat your the moonshine covered chocolate. So take a break, enjoy your chocolate. I want to show some comments from people who responded to this question because I want to get our followers' thoughts, and then I'm going to throw down my thoughts on Marxism. So this is from Sean. He says, "I cannot see any value in Marxism whatsoever, as it is a degenerate and destructive ideology. Yes, one can certainly vote for Trump without being a supporter per se." And then on the truth question, he says, "Depends on how one defines truth." We'll get to the truth one. He says, objective truth, absolutely not. But on that first part, he's talking about he doesn't see any value in Marxism because of it being a destructive ideology. So keep that in mind. Christopher, who's a guy, we have him on the show all the time, so thanks for the comment, Christopher. He's more on the liberal democratic side, so this will be interesting. He says, "My view is similar to that of Dr. King's," talking about MLK. "There's value in Marxism and there's value in capitalism. Our society has always just balanced the two. King fought for economic justice almost as much as racial justice, and that is definitely a principle that can be traced back to Marx." Interesting. So I don't think you can lose the entire body of his work. So trying to salvage him there, so a little bit different. Angela, we've had him, I know he's been following the channel for a while. I've seen his name before. He says, "No, there's no value because Marxism is flawed in its theory. Capitalism can't work because people are greedy, but Marxism can work because people are generous for the greater good. This is the flaw of Marxism." So again, he sees some issues with the theory. Robert has one talking about Marx's grandfather was the last long line of rabbis. His father was a Christian. And with all that religious background, I think Marx could be viewed as an angry prophet for telling the decision makers of his society that hell on earth they could expect, unless they change their indifferent attitudes towards the working population. And then he goes on to talk about different Marxist philosophers. And then the last one here is from Dylan, who says, "I believe that there is no value in the government having control of the distribution of all resources. A country's economy runs best with a low amount of government oversight." He goes on to explain his there. So pretty awesome responses there from everybody. I love, we were just talking about before we went live about how I love the fact that we can just throw down one of these questions and we've got all these different perspectives. Some people are like, absolutely not, there's no value in Marx. And then some people saying, well, maybe, some people have read some stuff into it, or maybe it can be salvaged, and we get kind of the full balance. So I will tell you my thoughts on it, which is that I don't see much in Marxism that is worth salvaging. I think absolutely a celebration of labor is a good thing. I mean, we look at how hard people work to build stuff. I mean, you and I, grew up in, kind of like the middle class, lower to middle class. And I mean, I was, cutting grass and stuff when I was like 14 years old and have been working ever since. And that labor is what makes, much of the economy go. Is you can have all the best ideas, but if you don't actually put hard work into what you're doing, then it's never going to come to fruition. I don't know. Have you seen that show Shark Tank, right? Where they got all the business execs looking to invest. The number one thing they look for is someone who's passionate about their work and they're willing to put in the time and energy and effort to make things go. But if you think about that Shark Tank show, what happens there? What happens is
they take over. They bite each other's heads off to try to either take over a company or they bite the heads off of the owners.
So there's but there's this back and forth as they try to get to an agreement, right? Is the guys who are at the working level who are trying to build their business up, and then the big rich, millionaires and billionaires are having a discussion, and they're arguing over like, how much of your company do I have to give away to you for you to invest in it? And I don't want to give away, more than 14 or 15%, because then I know you'll take over. If I give you 51%, then it's definitely over. And so there's this back and forth, because the guys who are starting up the business know that they need the support from people who've been around and the market understand it. And at the same time, these sharks, they know they need new ideas. They need to be on the forefront of each of their industries. And these guys out here are coming up with brilliant stuff. They need to work with them to stay, in the places that they have. And that back and forth to me is fascinating. And so there's a value to labor, there's a value to hard work, but then there's also a value to those that have gone before you and have made money and have learned the market and have created many of the institutions that we have. And it's when you have that mutual respect and that back and forth that the economy really goes. As opposed to, and now I get to bring it up, AOC's tweet, where she says, billionaires need the working class. The working class does not need billionaires. That's like flipping Marxism right there, is the idea that it all revolves around the working class, and that's all that is needed, right? That to me is the beginnings of a Marxist theory, because if you get to the point where we don't need them, they need us, right? They're expendable, we're not. We have the power, they don't. They're frauds, right? Then it's not very far from that you get into violence, because you say, well, wait a minute. So they don't need us, right? Or I'm sorry, we don't need them, they need us. They have all the money, we don't have enough. Why should we just take it from them? Because then we'll be fine. Why don't we just fight them and take what's ours, right? Take what we need that they are taking from us. When you get to the point that you celebrate labor and that's all that you see, then you see a world that doesn't reward exclusively on the basis of labor, which is what leads people to be like, this is really screwed up and unjust. And then all of a sudden it's like, how do we make it just, right? So it's a slippery slope from where she's at to an actual point of Marxism. And so, it's hard to find value in a theory, a system of belief that leads to so much violence and has historically done that to the extent that you followed it. And, I'll finish off with the story from Russia, is that I was a Russian major in college, as you know, and studied Russia for 4 years at University of Virginia. And we got into the history of the Russian Revolution and how Russia actually became communist. And it was fascinating because Lenin tried to institute communism in Russia shortly after the revolution in the earliest 20th century. And within a couple of years, he realized this is not working. We've run off or killed all of the managers of our factories. And now there's no one left who knows how to run the factory. Like, we've got people who go to work, and that, but who's going to tell them what shift to show up for? Who's going to actually manage their, their quotas? Who's going to actually keep the factory going whenever they go home? Right? There was complete chaos and confusion. He was like, dang it, we need the actual managers to come back, or we need to train new ones. And how do we do that? It was chaos.
You get a promotion.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that, like you said, as a theory, what value is there? And the things that, the commenters are picking apart of, do you need Marxism to really celebrate the labor? Do you need Marxism to try and advocate for more local government authority or grassroots efforts to make differences, as opposed to say the federal government to be your answer? Do you need Marxism to be the thing that you stressed in order to make that happen? I don't think that you do. I don't think that you need Marxism as a theory to actually advocate for those things. You can find all those truths and more elsewhere, and something else. But
what Marxism misses completely is the notion that management is a skill. That actually being a leader and an organizer and a team leader is a skill in itself, and it's not easy, right? It takes the skills of appreciating your people, of communicating and listening to them, of fulfilling their needs. You think about the military and what's a good leader, what's a good manager. It's someone who puts his people in position to be able to do what they do best and to lead from the front along with them, right? It's that is a good leader and manager. I think in Marxism, they think about we don't need a leader. We don't need anyone to tell us what to do or how to do it or to give us any guidance. We just work hard and that's it. And maybe in Marx's life, he saw people being oppressed and by bad leaders and managers. But the solution to that is not to get rid of managers and leaders entirely. The solution to that is to develop good ones, is to hone in on the skills that actually make a good leader. And a lot of times that is someone who's had experience working in the trenches and is willing to do that and willing to stay, communicate. When you see that Shark Tank show and you see those guys communicating and investing in those new ideas, I mean, when they have them on the show, they're giving them free airtime. They're giving them free publicity and they know it. And I think it's a great thing. And a lot of times they're giving them money as they get a stake in their company in order to stay, as I said, on the forefront of what's going on and to stay connected, as opposed to, say, the type of establishment that doesn't care about new ideas, doesn't care about new people, and doesn't care about investing in the workers, right? So you can kind of bridge that gap and kind of decrease the walls between those classes whenever you take workers and you teach them how to be good managers, and you have managers who spend time investing and listening and working with the frontline workers. You can have a business model that works. That, to me,
I think
is a better solution than anything I've ever heard from any socialist or communist or Marxist, bar none.
I think also what hurts is that so many of the bad managers make all the news. They make all the documentaries. Like if you tune into any sort of documentary on Netflix, like you'll read or watch USAG and how they totally botched everything, in running their company. You got corrupt people covering up sexual assault. You've got pharmaceutical companies that are, committing fraud. Like it's always those bad management, the bad management that just makes all the news. And when you have good managers, where are they? Like where do they look like? And it's from people who are being managed by good managers that advocate for them. It's just not making the news though in the way that, say, people who mismanage their companies do. And that's part of the struggle here as well, is that if someone is successful or a company is successful, there's immediately this assumption that, what corners are they cutting? Yeah. What exactly is going on here that they're so successful? And that suspicion, that skepticism of the institution actually being something that's working, the system actually working, is hard to overcome. And so naturally, and I think that also leads into the conversation of, say, where Congress is at, where you've got Democrats saying we don't want people being manipulated by companies and telling them to work in unsafe conditions. And you have Republicans saying we need to protect, the companies. We need to protect the managers and the people who are trying to actually lay out some good policies here so that they don't get sued. And immediately you can see that kind of divide. It might not be Marxism per se, but you see who's advocating for the working class and then who's advocating for the managerial class. And that's and they can't come to an agreement.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's breaking down those walls because Marxism sees everything in terms of class distinction. Are you proletariat or are you bourgeoisie, right? Which one are you? And that tells me everything I know about you. And the way that you beat that is you break down those classes. It's the same thing for government, right? Is if, you never see your congressman or congresswoman because they're always in D.C. and they're never in your district. That's a problem. Because then they're separated from what's really going on. They don't see it with their own eyes. They don't hear it. Right? They're not connected. But if you do have someone who's very connected to what's going on, they are a citizen, right, of the district. They live there. They eat there. Their family's there. They're going to the same schools, and they're listening to what people have to say and representing them well. Then you have representative democracy, and that divide shrinks. In business, if you've got business owners who are listening to the needs of the people and trying to create value for them, oh man, what you guys need is a Panera Bread, right? And it's a local business owner who actually sets up the organization, and sure, they get funded by big Panera Bread headquarters, but it's someone who lives in the area and says, this is what people have been wanting and they've been needing, I'll make it. Or he just sets up his own, fast food shop, and people take part of that. If it's that kind of thing, then it breaks down those divisions, because then he's hiring locally and all that kind of stuff, or she is hiring locally and giving jobs to your kids. But if it's someone who it's a corporate headquarters from out of nowhere, and they set up shop and they pay off people and all that kind of stuff, and they're not bringing any value to the community at all, then again, it creates that distance that people see. So breaking through those barriers to me is crucial as opposed to seeing people in one class or the other. Let me get to a comment here. So we have Sean. Sean had one of the comments. Let me bring your comment up here, Sean. Sean says, Marx and Engels seem to care much more about tearing down the hated bourgeoisie than helping the working class. And then he thanked us for a terrific discussion. And that's totally right, Sean. Like, that's what John was saying just a few minutes ago. John was saying that the reason that Marxism is really so detestable and so awful is because it is so focused on violence as the answer. Hey, we can't take the bourgeoisie, we can't take the ruling class and negotiate with them or bring them down to our level. You know, we're going to kill them. We're going to kill the entire class. And that's what they did in Russia. You know, and the ironic thing about Marxism is that whenever that happens and you destroy that ruling class, it creates a vacuum, as we talked about, for leadership and management and teamwork and communication, which is almost always filled by a dictator. It actually creates the problem that it was designed to fix. And that's why you see, you know, Kim Jong-un, you know, running North Korea, or you see, you know, China under a communist dictatorship, Stalin, and all of the, you know, dictators that succeeded him in Russia. You see that in Venezuela, right? Like, you see the vacuum created. I'll give you one last story, and then we'll kind of move on to the last one, because I could just talk about this all day, as you can tell.
Yeah.
In Venezuela, it's like people are like, oh, you know, I don't, like Bernie Sanders, I don't really support the type of socialism that's going on in Venezuela. I support the good socialism that doesn't end up with bad results. And it's like, where is that? You know, countries that don't claim it, right? Like, in Venezuela, what happened is that when Hugo Chavez took over, Venezuela gets an enormous amount of its revenue and its success came from oil refineries, right? And almost 90% of their oil refineries were located in the northwest part of the country. And one of the problems that they were running into is that these refineries were struggling to be able to continue producing the amount of oil that the country needed as it grew and became more successful. And so what they started to do was cut corners, right? And so while Hugo Chavez was running the country, you had all these independent inspectors come into the refineries and say, hey, this is wrong. You guys are cutting corners. You need to shut down. You need to slow down production. And I'll say, Hugo Chavez had already promised to all of the people that he was going to get rid of all the bad managers, and he was going to bring in this, you know, unprecedented utopia that is communism. And so what he did is he fired all of the inspectors and all of the people running the refinery, and he put in his people, and he was like, there is no more inspection problem now. There is no more, there's no standard that we have to live by, and now we can produce as much as we want. And so they got rid of that managerial class, the so-called elite or bourgeoisie, and they ushered in the proletariats, who basically said, no more inspections. And now look at Venezuela today, John. Look at the fact that this country's economic progress stopped, and then now has just been in the absolute gutter, and people are like, we have no idea why. It's because their top refineries have collapsed. They are hard broke to the point that the Iranians and other countries, Russia and China, are trying to go in there and rebuild them. But even they can't do that because they are that far gone, because the people who were there trying to keep it going were the evil bourgeoisie, the evil ruling class. And when you get rid of them, it creates, again, a vacuum that destroys that progress that they will bring, as opposed to trying to navigate a practical way. And so people want to pretend like, that's not socialism. It's absolutely socialism. It's absolutely Marxism. It's textbook, and it happens every time. So.
Man, that is an amazing story. I think about, like, you know, maybe people don't want, you know, an extreme form of socialism here, but like they want steps towards it, right? But even then, you have to start questioning, like, okay, where's the money going to come from? Because you know there's going to be Republicans that they're not going to be wanting that. There's Democrats even that aren't going to be wanting it. And like, you end up, you know, taking money, you end up borrowing money from the government. You end up like making deficit. Like it's not clean. You know, at this point, like someone's going to pay. You know, someone's going to pay money, and if it's going to be our kids or our kids' kids, like we need to start like coming to the reality of that. So when I think about like small steps towards socialism, I guess in our country, that would be like better. All I can think about is who's got to pay that. If it's not me, if it's not like just the 1%, because you know it ain't just going to be the 1%. right? That's not enough money to be able to cover what we want, and no one's going to be able to get that passed through entirely. So like it's just going to be borrowed money,
Yeah.
you know, all over again.
I'm,
Which
I'm out of beer, so let me give you my last rant for the day, which is, so you take Venezuela and Bernie Sanders, AOC, they say, oh, that can't happen here. That can't happen here. You know, that's not the type of socialism we would institute. It's exactly what would happen here. Is granted, America doesn't rely on, you know, single resources the way Venezuela would have, but you would see socialism occur in the same way because they would take this philosophy that says, you know what, you know, the problems that you have, your student loan debt, for example, that's not your fault. It's not the fault that you know, took out $80,000 in loan for, you know, a Bachelor of Arts degree that you had no plan to pay back. That is the fault of the system against you. And so what they would do is they would promise the same type of results that all socialists do, which is, hey, it's not your fault, it's their fault, let's get rid of them, and then the problem will go away. But it won't go away because in order for them to do what they're saying, they're going to have to plunder that wealth, they're going to have to attack that same class that did work to provide that college experience in the first place, and the system itself will go away. And yeah, that may take a lot more time in America than it did in Venezuela. It may not. It depends on how aggressively they pursue these policies. But in every case, what it's going to do is it's going to lay all the blame on a particular group of people, and it's not going to teach and inspire people to hold accountability for their own actions, and it's not going to generate those type of conversations between, again, the managerial class and the lower classes who are working their way up that need to happen. Is you really need to put both on notice and blend them and say, hey, maybe, you know, when you're thinking about a college degree, we look at what you can afford to take. What is your plan to pay this back? Are you going to a school that is within your price range, as opposed to being entitled to go wherever and to study anything, right? We have that conversation. Yeah. And then on the elite side, is you look at, hey, this college is is charging outrageous amounts of money, or it's using its resources unwisely, or in the case of a public college, illegally, and you hold them accountable for that, right? And you make sure that those prices are widely known. And so if someone is going to make this decision, then they should have the ability to discern all the information that's included with it. If they're going to get loans from the government to go to school, then they should understand that those are going to have to be paid back. And there should be, a stipulation there that if you're going to take out these loans, we need to have an assurance that, it's going to come with repayment plans as well, right? So that you don't get trapped in this endless debt. Those are the hard discussions we need to have. And when you don't have those, that's when you end up in a situation where you destroy the generator of wealth at the same time that you promise things that you can't deliver to the people who need it. So you would see what happen here in whether it's healthcare or whether it's someone, that you would see the exact same philosophy applied to the exact same results, just in a different context.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money here, Wes, which is emphasizing the fact that the managerial class and the working class need to have a space where they can have conversation happening more often. And I think what ends up with the frustration is that, when you're talking about, say, that, financial aid example, like financial aid advisors, they are overworked, right? Certainly they're underpaid, but their caseload is too much oftentimes for them to be able to advise in a proper way. That doesn't mean that we need to overturn the entire system. It means that there needs to be a lot more money being invested towards the people aspect of creating conversations between people who know what's going on and people who are entering into the system, whether as workers or as students who are wondering how to get oriented to their position as a student or as a worker. And that's the hard part, is that you can't replace that people aspect, but we try so often. And if there's a flaw to capitalism, I guess, and making money quick, it's that we end up eliminating the people aspect of it. But like you said, it's not about overthrowing everything. It's about trying to reemphasize this is what will actually grow a business, is investing in your personnel, investing in your people, investing in the conversations they have between the managers as well as the workers, the advisors, the students. I could go on about universities, but I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are. So I'm going to give one more minute to that last question, which is the hardest question, but I think we've answered it to a degree. The last question was, is truth relative? And I'm just going to use what we've talked about to sum this up, is Parts of it may be, but there are these principles that we discern in life that really hold true. And that's, we were just talking about Marxism, right? And this theory that blaming somebody else for all of your problems, doesn't work. Resorting to violence is not the answer. Those are principles that we see that apply irrespective of what place that you happen to observe them. So whether it's Venezuela or America or communist Russia, there's some truths of human nature. There are some principles that we can discern that apply to people. Hard work being valued, but also management being valued. You can see that in different ways. You could take a tribe in the Amazon and you could see organization happening and a leader, and he's getting his people where they need to be. And then you could see that in the most sophisticated American company where there's a leader trying to get his people or her people where they need to be. As you see these principles of existence that occur so often, and that's when someone says, "Oh, what happened to them doesn't affect me." Like that level of relativity just isn't true, because there is this human nature that we are, endowed with, that we all share to some degree. It just happens in different contexts along, in different languages and things like that. And so there's a balance between, sure, there are different contexts and that matters, but then there's also these principles of higher law, natural law, God-given truths that apply, to all people at all times, because there's a ultimate human nature that we have. And so that,
we're Berkeley.
Yeah.
At the core. So obviously there's going to be this higher law that we answer to, and that we believe that all men answer to at some point. Yeah. But yeah, go ahead and finish up. I have one more thought too before we're done.
Yeah, and so that when we say that Marxism, categorically doesn't work and has fundamental flaws that take away the value, right? We're talking about that in the abstract. We're saying that is a truth. That is a truth, that it just does not work based upon the actual facts of human nature. But then at the same time, there are differences between where's Venezuela at with it, how long would it take America to get there. Those are differences in that truth, actually playing out. So there's a respect on both sides. So anyway, that's all I got for tonight, Jonathan. I really loved all of the comments that people had. I love these questions that we went through. Lots of great comments. A couple of folks dialing in and sending some discussions. But what do you got? Last comments.
Let me hit up that one question. I was thinking about this throughout the whole episode that we were doing, and I know we can go a lot of different directions with it, and we need to finish up quick. So the one thing I would take from the whole is truth relative conversation is that I would say truth is complicated, but that does not mean that it is necessarily relative. Okay, trying to discern whether or not God exists or doesn't exist. You might say that I'm unable to actually discern that. From this 1 hour, could you discern whether or not I'm married or not married? It might be hard to discern that. Truth is hard to discern. That does not mean that it is relative to everyone. It just means that it is complicated, and it is something that needs further discussion, further discernment. And I think the more that we end up talking to each other, the better picture that we have of, truth actually coming into focus. But the more that we stay if you're talking about truth is relative in the sense of I am my core being and this is truth to me, but I haven't talked to anybody else about it, you might have a belief that you fervently believe to be true, but we all know that no matter how much you believe something to be true, it doesn't really make it true, right? If I believe that, say my daughter is going to get all A's in elementary school, I fervently believe that, you don't know if it's actually going to happen, but the more that you end up talking with other folks, and seeing, what strategies are available, or what have you experienced? What have you experienced? You can see that truth come into focus. So that would be my thought: is don't confuse your inability to ascertain truth by yourself to mean that truth is relative.
Yeah, no, that's great. Or in AOC's case, you could just read, a couple books, and there you go, and you got it. I had to throw that in there. All right. Well, hey. Great show, and thanks again for tonight. For those that are following us, be sure to dial into our Facebook page if you haven't liked that already. We're on YouTube as well. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We've got a book club that meets twice a month. We've got a whole lot of interviews coming up with a lot of great speakers. We've got some giveaways. We're going to be giving away some books. And then if there's any topic that you want us to cover, clearly we will spend plenty of time on those questions. So throw them our way. We'll be happy to get into it. So thanks again, Jonathan. Have a great night.